Director, you are live.
Good morning, everybody. This is the August 12th, 2021 Coastal Permit Administrator meeting. And we've had some technical difficulties this morning, so I'm going to go ahead and start the meeting. I'm going to go ahead and start the meeting at 11:18 a.m. So let's see, at this point, I'm just going to go ahead and make a quick announcement. Effective April 16, 2020, the Mendocino County Coastal Permit Administrator meetings are conducted virtually and not available for in-person participation pursuant to a state executive order N29-20. Meetings are live streamed and available for viewing on the Mendocino County YouTube page. And with that, like I said, meeting was called to order at 11:18 a.m. Do we have a determination of noticing for this meeting?
Legal notice has been determined.
Thank you. So with that, we'll move to item number 3, which is the regular calendar. Case number CDP 2018-0012. The owner and applicant is Noah Shepard. Agent is Spade Natural Resources Consulting. The request is a standard coastal development permit. After the fact, request to construct a single-family residence associated with the ancillary structures less than 100 feet from the sensitive habitat areas. Environmental determination was a mitigated negative declaration. Project is located in the town of Mendocino on the south side of Calypso Lane, approximately 800 plus or minus feet from its intersection with Little Lake Road, and located at 10760 Calypso Lane. Town of Mendocino, assessor's parcel number 119-090-46. And can I please get a staff report?
Yes, my pleasure. Juliana Cherry, planner with Mendocino County Planning and Building Services. Good morning. Thank you for providing the project description as part of the introduction. The applicant, Noah Shepard, has been storing an unassembled home on the property, which is a code violation. And this coastal development permit is intended to resolve the violation, but also allow the construction of the single family home, a detached garage, connection to the sewer lateral provided by Mendocino City Community Services District, which will also include having a septic tank on site. The septic tank will connect to the sewer lateral. There would not be a leach field. Also, there's a test well on site. It's really midpoint on the property, which makes development, siting the home very challenging. The test well would be converted to a production well. At the time that staff prepared the report, we had received comments on more than one occasion from Mendocino City Community Services District. With the advent this last Tuesday of receiving comments from an adjoining property owner, we have been in contact with the water district about the status of the groundwater extraction permit. I would like to provide a complete presentation today, but I also would like to conclude or begin with asking for additional time to assemble a response to the public comments that were received on Tuesday and Wednesday of this week. And so staff will be asking the Coastal Permit Administrator to consider a continuance to the August 26th meeting, which is a regularly scheduled meeting, to give us time to work with the Community Service District and County Council regarding the easement, which was some of the public comments received. This project has been very challenging in part because of the work that was done before the application was filed. Not only was a home stored on the property, but sometime 2012, 2010, the property the property owner at that time removed more than 6,000 square feet of tree canopy. This is after looking at quite a bit of analysis and comments regarding the extent of tree canopy at the site. We believe that more than 6,000 square feet of tree canopy was removed without authorization. This is a type of major vegetation removal. So we're also asking the coastal permit administrator after the fact to approve authorizing an on-site vegetation restoration and monitoring plan. These are part of the recommended conditions of approval. The plan was proposed by the applicant. The applicant in their proposal said if the grand tree fir Isha, if the trees within the grand fir Isha are impacted, then they would plant, I think, 3 types of large trees, and then sword ferns and wax myrtles. Staff feels that that impact occurred when the tree canopy was reduced, and I'll be showing you some exhibits. You can see how the extended canopy has changed over time, and we accept that proposed mitigation at this time and would like it completed prior to final occupancy for the residents. The condition that we've prepared regarding that states that the property owner would provide an affidavit that the planting had occurred, and that would be the extent of the requirement. Another complication relating to the site was the building envelope as shown on the subdivision tentative map and in the botanical survey report from 2006. The botanical survey report showed a completely different area as recommended for building and recommended a 100-foot buffer. The subdivision accepted the 100-foot buffer. It is from the stream that's to the south of the property. The property has 2 streams on it, one that just kind of nips the northwest corner of the property and one along this that crosses the southern portion of the property. The 2006 Botanical Survey report recommended a 100-foot buffer from the edge of riparian vegetation. So when we were looking at where is the most appropriate area for development on this property, we looked not only at the conditions that were adopted for the subdivision, the 2006 Botanical Survey report, and the 2019 update to that report that was amended 2 or 3 times by Spade Natural Resource Consulting. So we finally settled on using the recommendations from 2019 because they surveyed existing conditions. And all of the development as proposed is located outside of that buffer that was established in 2006. The 2019 update identified an additional sensitive habitat area on the property, which is a grand fir forest. And the trigger, I think, for identifying that in part was a site visit where we had received comments from Daniel Harrington at CDFW, and Daniel had asked about the change in tree canopy. We have included in the staff report additional aerial imagery over years so that the coastal permit administrator could see the changes in canopy over time. And as you look at those aerial imagery, it's really kind of remarkable the change that happens in 2012. The tree canopy is significantly different, and there's now a meadow where previously there had been more extensive tree canopy. As part of the report of compliance, Spade Natural Resource Consulting analyzed this change in tree canopy and stated that when the property to the west was developed, part of the tree canopy was reduced to create the road easement access to the parcel to the west. This subject parcel and the parcel to the west that's owned by the Guggenheims adjoin Calypso Lane on the east side of this parcel. So the Guggenheims who live to the west use an access route across the Shepherd's property. So when the home where the Guggenheims live was developed, Spain Natural Resource Consulting says that they believe that trees were reduced at that time. Subsequently, though, after the home was built, the tree canopy was additionally reduced. And while we can never really know what type of trees were removed, we do believe that it was more than 6,000 square feet. And we do believe that the understory underneath the tree canopy is different today than it was before the trees were removed. The 2006 survey report describes the understory as including things like sword ferns, wax myrtles, and I think that is why the replanting plan proposes those types of plants. So I really wanted to explain how we came to determining the best site for development on the property. When we did our initial referral in 2019, we received comments from CDFW with concerns about the reduction in tree canopy at the site. We then did a site visit with Coastal Commission, CDFW staff, myself, the applicant, and their agent. And we had this site view to determine the extent of ESHA. Since the site view, we have done a second project referral because we received additional information from the applicant, including some technical reports about the characteristics of the site. But we have not received formal comments from CDFW since that initial first referral. So we do not have concurrence on reducing the buffer from the standard set in our code, which is 100 feet. Therefore, the applicant's proposal to put the home in the location where it is, which is generally 50 feet or more from the Grand Fir Forest ESHA, but in some instances less than 50 feet, is within the ESHA buffer. The buffer is 100 feet, as we do not have concurrence either from planning staff or CDFW hasn't provided their concurrence. So we're working with a 100-foot buffer and a proposal to locate the home within the buffer. Our code does allow for some development within the buffer. There's 11 criteria that's considered to determine whether allowing development within the buffer is appropriate. And one of the criteria is that there's no other feasible location for development. The applicant did, at some point, I think in 2020, revise their application and removed some of the accessory structures they were considering from the proposal to pull back on the expansive nature of the development and really try to push development as much as possible to be located more than 50 feet from development. But it's not entirely possible because of the test well that I mentioned earlier. The test well really is sort of, if the home is a T shape, the test well is really right in the crook of the T. And so they're really, the home kind of would, that is stored on the property, that home would really need to pivot around the test well location. So there's really, for this particular home that is stored on the property, there really is no other feasible location than what was proposed and filed in August of 2020. The other thing about the proposed development that I wanted to mention is CDFW staff in their original comments, and I think at the site view and maybe in follow-up phone calls with me, did mention that they preferred the site that was proposed because it is more upland from the creeks, and it's closer to the road where there's an existing prairie today. So there's less impacts to the surrounding Grand Fir Forest because of how the home is approximate, close to the easement. I I also want to mention that this lot is irregular and has unusual access. If you look at the site exhibit included in the staff report, the access road really bisects the northern portion of the property. North of the easement, the land gives way and goes down to a creek. So it really kind of follows this high point on the land. But it doesn't traditionally, this lot doesn't front a street. It doesn't have significant frontage onto Calypso Lane. And this utility easement that's used for the driveway for the Shepherd property and for access to the Guggenheim property really is atypical in its arrangement compared to other lots. In our code, when we look at defining front yards, one of the parts of the code says that the coastal permit administrator can determine the front yard when it is an irregular lot. And so part of my presentation today is to ask the coastal permit administrator to find the northern property line to be the front property line. And then we will use our code requirements to measure front yard distances from that northern property boundary. The home is proposed about 84 feet south of the northern property line. And as I mentioned, CVFW is in support of its close proximity to the easement. The surrounding land uses of the area are residential. And the project is mostly in conformance with our policies in the coastal element. This property is located in the town of Mendocino and is subject to the coastal element chapter 4.13 for the town of Mendocino, which was updated in 2017. It is not consistent though with our policies regarding buffers, as the home would be entirely located within the 100-foot buffer, since a buffer reduction does not have concurrence from staff, and CDFW has not provided comment. Let's see, so then we did meet with the applicant last week, and we went over, they had provided several written comments on the conditions that were proposed. I believe yesterday, staff posted and shared recommended revisions based on our conversation with the applicant last week. And I apologize, the work, I was isolating and working from home. I was unexpectedly out of the county for more than 24 hours. And so in working from home on this memo, I didn't have access to all of my notes in preparing this memo. So I did contact the agent yesterday when I had the draft memo ready and asked to make sure that I had hit all the points, and I had missed a couple. So I'm really appreciative of those additional comments from Spade Natural Resource Consulting as I prepared and the memo was published. So just to go over, I'd like to move to conditions, if that's all right with you, or would you rather I just stop at this point and we move to public comment?
No, go ahead and discuss the conditions.
Okay.
And then
So
after
this
that,
is,
I'll go ahead and allow for public comment.
okay, all right, thank you. It's the August 12th memo. It's posted to the meeting website. And I do have some additional clarifications for this memo. First of all, I'd like to note that the project is more than 100 feet from a riparian setting, and it is not within the mapped appeal jurisdiction, and therefore the project is not appealable to the California Coastal Commission. This was misrepresented in the staff report. As I mentioned, I did meet with the applicant and their agent last week, and this memo is in response to the conversations that we had last week. We did come to agreement about many of the conditions, but there were some outstanding issues, and I believe I've really talked about the requested reduction to the width of the buffer and the lack of comment from CDFW and Planning and Building Services lack of support to reduce the buffer. We're recommending a 100-foot buffer from the Grand Fir Forest, and we're recommending that we continue the previously adopted 100-foot buffer from the edge of the vegetation associated with the creeks. There was a request to locate within the development within the buffer, and staff is wholly supportive of the request. As the basis of that is the submitted August 2020 revised site plan. This will locate some of the development less than 50 feet from the Grand Fir Forest, but it's really a limited area. And so that gets to one of the conditions that I wanted to add to the list that I inadvertently missed. And I just for a moment, I'd like to share that with you. So here's, I'm recommending an additional condition 21. As there is no other feasible site available on the parcel, development is authorized within the buffer area as shown on the August 4, 2020 site plan revision. I'm still kind of thinking a little bit about this language. If you're thinking you're going to approve a different site plan arrangement, then I would recommend not including the date. And earlier in my presentation, I had talked about the front lot line, and I thought it would be prudent to add condition 22 so that the coastal permit administrator has defined what is the front lot line, and staff is recommending that that be the northern property boundary line. So on exhibits, attachment A to my memo includes those conditions that were published in the staff report. And I have used strikeout and underline to identify the changes in the conditions that were published. Condition 1 references the Division 2 code rather than Division 3. As I mentioned, this is in the town of Mendocino, so some clarifications regarding the applicable code. And then Spade Natural Resource Consulting requested that we add a preamble that we frequently do see in conditions, that to remain valid, progress towards the completion of the project must be continuous. The applicants have sole responsibility for reviewing this application before the expiration date. The county will not provide a notice prior to the expiration date. In condition 2, a clarification that it's Division 3 of our code and not Division 2. A clarification throughout the recommended conditions is to correctly refer to the coastal permit we're considering as CDP 2018-0012. In some instances, it's incorrectly referenced. We're recommending replacing condition 9 with striking it entirely and replacing it with what is becoming a frequently used condition at the request that from the coastal permit administrator, that any building request shall include all conditions of approval of CDP 2018-12 attached to or printed on the plan submitted. Condition 10, the preamble and item A, we're recommending be deleted, but that we retain condition B. Prior to final occupancy for any building permit, restoration planting shall be completed within 50 feet of this Grand Fir Forest Isha. The property owner shall furnish a statement that the restoration planting is completed. And I had mentioned this condition earlier in my presentation. Condition 11, we're recommending that item A be deleted and item B be modified, the first sentence deleted, and we would just retain future development within the adopted buffer areas and riparian and Grand Fir Forest Ishas shall require a coastal development permit or permit amendment, except exemptions allowed by MCC section 20.720.020A1 for repair and maintenance. What we've been finding over the last several years is Coastal Commission staff really sees that there's a gap in our code that allows accessory, like buildings commonly found associated with a single family home can be constructed under an exemption when even when there is an ISHA buffer. So this condition that we're recommending with the modifications closes this gap. And it allows the property owner to repair and maintain those things that the coastal permit administrator is approving under this permit, but any future development would require a coastal permit. Also, it authorizes a sewer connection to Mendocino City Community Services District and an on-site septic tank intended to connect to the sewer lateral. Any future on-site solid waste treatment system shall obtain a coastal development permit or permit amendment. I'd like to note at this time that we have not received a site plan that shows the location where the sewer lateral connection will happen. And we have not received, nor do we have on file with the Department of Environmental Health, a schematic showing where the septic tank would be located. So this condition specifically authorizes that work, but we really do not know the location of where that work would occur. We're recommending that condition 12 be deleted in its entirety and that condition 13 have minor modifications, eliminating the clause at the beginning and just beginning with the word exterior, and then concluding the condition 13 with or authorized designee. This condition is commonly adopted in the town of Mendocino. Dark skies are incredibly important to the people who live there, and so we very often adopt this condition from the zoning code. And it requires that the exterior lights be downshielded and reduce sources of glare. We're recommending a modification to condition 14, deleting, it shall read, in accordance with MCC section 20719.020A, a buffer area shall be established adjacent to all environmentally sensitive habitat areas. And then the next sentence would be removed. Then 14A would remain as written, and 14B would be modified. A minimum 100-foot buffer shall be memorialized and measured from the Grand Fir Forest ISHA. So this condition establishes the previously adopted riparian ISHA buffer, continues that buffer, and then establishes a second ISHA buffer for the Grand Fir Forest. We're recommending that all of condition 15 be removed, and that condition 16 have modifications. Condition 16 requires a deed restriction. I just want to put that up on the screen because this is one of the things that I forgot to include when I was working on those edits yesterday. So here is condition 16. The condition has been renumbered to condition 15 as part of the memo that I prepared. So here we're recommending that those sections that be deleted relate to acknowledging hazards. There really aren't any documented hazards with the site. There are two creeks on the north and the south, and the road follows sort of a ridge. So there is the potential that water will flow across the property down to the creeks, but there is not an identified flood hazard with the property or other types of hazards that would typically require a deed restriction. The intent with the deed restriction really is to memorialize the building envelope and the ESHA buffers and things like that. So we're recommending that the published condition 16, A, B, and C be entirely deleted, and we begin with D. D is lettered A, as you can see here on the screen. And then we're recommending that under C, an exhibit shall be attached to the deed restriction identifying the property boundaries, all easements, the wells, and the Grand Fir Forest ESHA, riparian ESHA, their buffers, which are 100 feet, and the 50-foot wide restoration planting area. The exhibit shall include a legend and a standard scale. The exhibit shall be prepared to the satisfaction of the coastal permit administrator or their designee. And this document shall run with the land for the life of the project. Bind all successors and assigns, and shall be recorded free of all prior liens and encumbrances except for tax liens. Let's see here. So then on the published staff report condition 17, we are recommending some further clarification. We received roughly 5 total technical reports about the vegetation on the site and how the development might fit within the site. So there was some duplication across these 5 reports. We initially received the 2006 botanical survey with a 2019 update. That 2019 update was revised, I think, August 23rd, August 27th, and then September 19th. And then there was a report of compliance and another study, a habitat restoration plan, I believe. So in preparing conditions 17 and 18, I did try to blend the recommendations that across all the reports into conditions for the coastal permit administrator. It is also our practice not to refer to technical reports as a condition, but actually what I've been seeing of late with other projects going to the coastal permit administrator, we take the actual recommendations that are in the report and we put them in as conditions of approval, and we work with the language, for example, just making minor clarifications so that the conditions are consistent with staff's recommendations, the input that we received from other agencies, and that they work with the project as a whole. And I've been very appreciative of the additional clarifications from the consultants who prepared the technical reports I relied upon, because I try very hard to be authentic to both what they're recommending, but also the report and the recommendations that staff is making. So on condition 17, the preamble, we're recommending some clarifications there. Condition 17 is really about avoidance measures and not mitigation measures. To avoid birds and bats during their nesting season, to survey for potential red-legged frogs, Sonoma tree voles. It turns out that there's a rare spider to check for as well. To avoid the Grand Fir Forest and the riparian habitats. But we do need to allow for staging as well. So the home will be built roughly more than 50 feet from the Grand Fir Forest. And we do need to allow for staging and activities to occur within the buffer when they're associated with building the home and the garage. So you'll see that on item F of the memo on page A5, item F, we've clarified that the avoidance shall be more than 50 feet from the Grand Fir Forest and more than 100 feet from the riparian ESHA. Condition 18 really reflects the recommendations of the special status community avoidance and replanting plan that was prepared in 2020. We have not received any comments despite having asked multiple times from CDFW. So it's really the coastal permit administrator is adopting the recommendations that are in that report. And I've included the recommendations of the report from section 3 and 4 of that report, but I've modified them as the CPA will be, we're recommending that the CPA adopt those recommendations. I feel that because the CPA is adopting the recommendations of that report, if there are going to be modifications to the report, the CPA should be consulted. And so that's reflected in some of the edits that I've included in the condition 18. I also try to use more permissive language in condition 18 because I think what we really want, say, for example, with fencing, is that the fencing go up, and we don't really care if the fencing is orange color or blue color. So in many instances, the contractor on site needs to protect and create staging and fencing areas or erosion and sedimentation. But I want to let the contractor achieve those things in the way that's best according to the biologist. So really to give some guidance here. So there is, under condition 18, there are 3 sections. There's an impact avoidance plan, there is a restoration plan, and then the reporting would be sent to CDFW. I have indicated in the conditions where I've deviated from the recommendations in the report by indicating that I'm supplanting the report's recommendation. Condition 19, we're not recommending any changes. Since we haven't heard from CDFW regarding the special status avoidance and replanting plan, that we would like to see the replanting occur before final occupancy of the building. Since we haven't heard from CDFW, we have included condition 19 saying that the MMRP shall be prepared and accepted by the CPA in consultation with CDFW. Condition 20 is a required condition. There are some fees that the applicant needs to pay to within a certain number of days of the approval. And then I believe the other conditions, let's just go over to attachment B. Staff is also recommending an additional condition, condition 20. In talking with the applicant and their agent last week, we realized there's a possibility that the applicant may not build this home. And the point of applying for the coastal permit was to resolve a code violation. The code violation is storing a structure on the property without permits. So it could be that they don't go ahead and assemble this home at this property, but they still need to resolve their code violation. So condition 20 on page B7 of the memo is to direct the property owner if they're not intending to build the home. The code violation, storing an unassembled residence on the site, shall be resolved prior to the expiration of CDP 2018-12. The structure shall either be removed from the property or a residential building permit final inspection shall be completed prior to the expiration of this CDP 2018 number 12. I apologize for the length of my presentation. I try really hard to be brief, but there were several moving parts with this application, and it was very complicated. Complicated not only because of the impacts that have occurred at the site without authorization, but also the lack of comments since 2019 from CDFW. I will say CDFW has gone through a lot of changes in staffing, and they're stretched incredibly thin. but it has been hard to prepare recommendations without having written comment from CDFW regarding, say, the reduction in the buffer. Staff really did work hard and coordinated with the applicant and their agent to find conditions where they could build the home that they'd like to build at this property in the location that they're proposing. And I think that it is a good project and worthwhile of an approval. If you have questions, I am available.
Thank you very much. A very detailed presentation and staff report. Okay, so at this point, for our listening audience and viewing audience, staff is recommending a continuance to August 26, 2021. However, we do have folks that are ready to talk and would like to speak. I'd like to go ahead and take public testimony at this point in time. And what I'd like to do is ask the applicants and their agent to speak at this point in time. And you want to go ahead and allow Ms. Spade, the agent.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning. I don't see me on the screen, but that's okay. So I do have some recommendations for some further changes. I did send you those recommendations this morning in an email to the Coastal Permit Administrator as well as to Juliana Cherry. After I go through those recommended changes to the conditions of approval, I'd like to talk briefly about the letter from the neighbor and the request for continuance, because I don't believe that a continuance is warranted to address that letter. I don't see any substantial issues brought up by the neighbor letter that would warrant that continuance. I would request instead that we reconvene in the afternoon so that we can revise these conditions and make the changes that I'm recommending here. So if you can please go to the email I sent this morning. It's called Recommended Edits to Staff Changes. And I will go over what my recommendations are. I'm not able to pull this up on the screen, so hopefully you have this in front of you. I was disappointed.
No, that's all right. So at this point, staff has asked for a continuance, and I'm going to take the public comments today, but I will be continuing this meeting to August 26th.
Sure. So let's go ahead and continue. So if we look at the condition changes, I first talked about the condition 16 change, which I see that Juliana has made an effort to revise that in her recommendations, which I appreciate. In condition 17, unfortunately, even though I've pointed this out 3 times now, the language is still not recommended to change in such a way that the project could actually be completed on the ground. The way that the condition currently is written states that all staging and material storage and other project components must occur more than 50 feet from the Grand Fir Forest. And that is not possible to build. If you look at the site plan, it shows that the proposed development does not meet that criteria. So including that requirement in condition 17F essentially is a denial of the project. So I would recommend again, and this is the 3rd time that I'm recommending a change here, that the condition be revised so that the project could actually be built on the ground. And then if we move on from that, condition 18A, it essentially requires a duplication of plastic fencing. So the way it's currently written, it's asking for fencing in 2 different places. And then it's also asking for fencing in such a way that it would just make it very difficult to stage and develop the project. I am recommending a change to that condition 18A. The way it is currently written reads that the fencing needs to occur 50 feet from the outward extent of the Grand Fir Forest and 100 feet from the riparian Isha. That would be in 2 different locations on 2 different sides of the project, which is duplicative and just a waste of fencing. I recommend that the change say at least 100 feet from the stream and riparian sensitive area and outside of the Grand Fir Forest within the non-native grassland on the south side and along the north side of the private driveway, Calypso Lane. That would allow for the fencing to be located in an area that's already disturbed, and it would encompass the disturbed area for the construction. So that's my recommendation there, is to basically make the fencing put in a more realistic location. And then moving on from there, we have condition 18, let's see here, what is this next one? Yeah, condition 18C limits landscaping to regionally native plants. This isn't warranted, it just isn't. It's not a condition that I recommended, it's something that staff put in there, it's not something that the code requires. You know, there are some requirements in the code that talk about native plants, but you know, this is, there's a long history, and I'm not going to bore you with that because I know that you've already read the documents that I provided that talk about the Grand Fir Forest and, you know, how this whole history came about and how when those, when the developments occurred that were, you know, basically the removal of the trees there, not by the current owner, but by the previous owner, subdivision had indicated this was a very common forest, which I believe it is. And, you know, to require so much, it just seems unrealistic to me. But moving on, so conditions 18J through M need to be reformatted. It doesn't necessarily need to be rewritten. It was a condition that I wrote in my study. It's just that the way that it is currently formatted is very confusing and doesn't make it clear that it's all part of the same condition addressing the possibility of further impacts to the forest. So those 4 parts there, the J through M, are all part of kind of the same grouping, which says if in fact there are further impacts to the Grand Fir Forest, then, and if you kind of remove it from that grouping, then it doesn't really make sense in that context. So I'm just asking that it be reformatted. And then condition 19 requires a mitigation monitoring and reporting plan. We've already provided all of the plans that were asked for, including the replanting plan, which includes mitigation, monitoring, and reporting. And I don't believe that an additional mitigation, monitoring, and reporting plan is warranted or appropriate. And I want to point out again here that this project has been complete for more than a year. We turned in, you know, the last information that was requested, and a lot of information was requested over a year ago. And, you know, there's been plenty of time for staff to write the report, to get Fish and Wildlife concurrence, and to do all these things that didn't happen. And I don't believe that adding extra requirements that are completely unwarranted like this, you know, is really appropriate after all this time. I do want to talk about a couple of the things that Juliana mentioned that I was not aware of before. At the beginning of her discussion, she talked about adding 2 additional conditions. One of them was to approve the project in place, which is fine. The second one was defining the lot line as the northern property boundary. I don't really understand why this would occur, and it doesn't seem consistent with the way that we actually define the front yard. So I would like a little bit of clarification on why we're asking for a front yard setback to be on the north side of the property, because it just seems inconsistent with the way we do setbacks, and I don't see what it would accomplish. And then finally, just discussing the concerns that were outlined in the neighbor letter. I just kind of wanted to go over those real quick. The first concern was that the project is not supported by adequate water resources. We do have an email that was provided from MCCSD yesterday from Ryan, in which he says that the water is, in fact, the project is served, and it's all good. He says, "Thank you for the phone call today. As I mentioned, MCCSD intends to issue a groundwater extraction permit for 10760's Calypso based on their 2005 hydrological study and board approval once the stage 4 water shortage emergency is over and the moratorium is lifted." So that essentially means once it rains, that permit will be issued. There is a hydrological study. There has, it's basically, it's good to go. If there are concerns about that, you could add a condition in there requiring that water be provided prior to final, or whatever language you wanted, but I don't see how that is an issue. I think we have the confirmation there. Regarding the next question, let's see here, development infringes upon vested easement rights. They're basically talking about the proposal to realign the driveway, which within that 40-foot roadway easement, which is a right that I believe both the Guggenheims and the subject property owner have, in terms of having the ability to make improvements within that approved 40-foot easement, as it was already approved by the subdivision to do so. So I don't believe that really this is an issue for the coastal permit process in the first place. I believe that is already something that is an approved right. The applicant intends to make those changes in such a way that the roadway would be more improved than it is now. So the improvements would make the road better than it is now. And then finally, the neighbors bring up some, I guess, complaints about further violations. And this is the first time that we have heard of these further violation complaints. This does not seem like an appropriate avenue to bring this up like the day before the hearing. If this is a verifiable complaint that they have with the neighbor, they need to file that as a complaint, and it should not be something that has anything to do with the subject property and approval. And did you have anything further on that?
There was no grading done anyway,
Yeah, and then no, it says there was no grading done anyway.
Some gravel was put down 2 years ago.
There was some gravel put down 2 years ago. And so those are my comments at this time.
Okay.
Road improvements will allow.
Thank you.
Okay, and the road improvements will allow ingress and egress to the Guggenheim property. It's not like the road improvement would make their access disappear.
Okay, great, thank you. Mr. Shepherd, is there anything you would like to add?
Is there anything you want to add?
No, I don't think so at this time. I think that Teresa pretty much covered it. That the water, there's a full hydrological study done. I was at MCSD yesterday, talked to Ryan Rhodes. He said that basically they're ready to, as soon as the development is done and we get some rain, the stage 4 is over, he's going to issue ground extraction permit from the well. So that study has already been done, that we've proven adequate water. They feel that are on board with this development. All road improvements will be, better than they are now, and it won't impact the neighbors whatsoever. So I think that that those are the main points.
Okay, thank you very much. So at this point, I'm going to go ahead and open the public hearing and take comments from the public. And I think, Mr. Morrow, you were the first one to raise your hand, so we'll go ahead and hear from you. And you are limited to...
Speakers will have 3 minutes to speak. Colin, you will be first. David, you will be next. Please remember to state your name for the record, and you will have 3 minutes.
Good morning. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Good morning. My name is Colin Morrow. I'm here on behalf of David Guggenheim and Holly Guggenheim, who own the parcel to the west. I tried to cover the key reasons that a coastal development permit cannot issue at this point in my letter, and I hope that everyone's had a chance to review that. I just want to highlight a few things on that. Beginning with the water issue, I would point out first, even if one assumes for the sake of argument that the MCCSD is hypothetically going to issue a permit when this indefinite moratorium, which could go on forever, concludes, that permit is going to be for less than 0.2 gallons per minute. By the county's own standards, that's not enough water to support construction. You have to have a bare minimum of half a gallon. Nothing can be developed with less than half a gallon, which the applicant can't show. And anything less than a gallon requires backup resources. So put simply, even if you assume the MCCSD is going to issue any permit, that permit's not going to supply enough water. Beyond that, the permit's founded on old faulty data from before the conveyance of the 1981 well, as I phrased it in my letter. The fundamental precept of a hydrological study is you look at wells that are owned by other people around the well you're pumping, and you look at the effects there. The fact that the ownership of that well changed means that a new hydrological study is required. The applicant just simply doesn't have water, and that alone requires denial of the application. I also want to talk about the front yard setback issue as it relates to the road. The Guggenheim parcel is theoretically subdividable. And if you look at, it's Mendocino County Code 20.692.015, subdivision C. Again, that's 20.015. You'll see that the easement has to be used for the 20-foot setback, front yard setback, if there's the even potential for there being
seconds remaining.
Thank you. I wasn't seeing a timer up there, so I appreciate that. Importantly, with the road too, and this is a reason that even if you have discretion not to utilize it to use the northern boundary, that property really drops off to the north. So really moving the road to the north or considering that northern boundary, the setback, is really using unbuildable land that dives deep into a ravine. I know I'm running out of time.
Time is up. The next speaker will be David and then Holly. You will have 30 seconds.
30
minutes. 3 minutes, sorry. David, you will need to unmute yourself.
Okay, am I on?
Yes, go
Yes.
ahead.
Okay, hi, my name is David Guggenheim. I'm the neighbor to the west. The first issue I want to briefly raise is water. This applicant's well is close to and adjacent to my well, one of my two wells. And this well runs dry every May for the last 25 years. Fortunately, we have a second well that's still producing water, but all the wells on line with the applicant's well, all the wells to the east and all the wells to the west are dry. I also want to talk about grading and filling. In 3 years ago, in 2018, truckloads of gravel were dumped and graded, and this changed the water flow from water flowing into the creek. It now flows into my house, and every winter since this grading and dumping has occurred, my wood floors in my house buckle. The third item I'd like to bring up is an item of public safety, an issue I'm really worried about. The 20-foot steel prefab has been located directly in the middle of my access driveway for 3 years. It completely covers the water trenching that we had and the culverts that we had. We have to drive around the steel container. The steel container is set on 5 foot high, what are now turned out to be rickety wooden stilts. And it's a hazard to me and the general public every time we drive down the road. We're asking that the steel container be moved back away from the road. It's been there for 3 years with no foundation. And it's a worry and a hazard. If you have any questions, thank you for your time. If you have any questions, we'd like to entertain them. The water is the big issue in this area. All of us are running out of water. Without water, the land is worthless. Where we used to have fewer houses, now we have
15
more
seconds,
houses.
David.
Okay. Everybody on Calypso Lane, we've been trying to find water and drill wells on Calypso Lane that go back to the McElroys over 50 years. And all the shallow wells, 40 foot, are now running dry. So there's meager water resources on this property, and we're just taxing them too heavily. Additional demand is going to be a hardship.
Your time is up, David. Okay, and
Holly.
it is your turn, Holly. You will have 3 minutes.
Am I unmuted? Hi. Hello?
We can hear you.
Okay. First of all, I see that you all put in a lot of time working with Noah Shepherd and trying to get this so it works for him. I appreciate the time that you took to read our lawyer, Colin Morrow's statement showing why we really feel that this permit should be denied, and for listening to myself and my husband. So many things from my end feel like they've been misrepresented. The wells that they claim in the report are not their wells, they are our wells. And it seems like, I'm just an amateur, but the people that own the 2-acre parcel have taken trees down, have dumped illegally, and it seems like they're being rewarded by trying to get a permit to put their home on our driveway that's been there for over 50 years. And the land is very steep to the other side. It puts a hardship on anyone, and the road, people have said the road will be better. It won't. Nothing has been maintained on this property, and it's just a mess. So thank you at least for listening to us. I hope you read our lawyers, Colin Morrow's letter carefully. I think he stated clearly a lot of the objections we have. And if you come and visit the site, I mean, if there is no site that's buildable or build a different model or whatever, but please remove, deny this permit. That's all I can say. It's emotional because it's our home and we love the land and it's beautiful. And the people that have owned the 2-acre parcel are just ruining it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Do we have any other speakers?
No. And that concludes public comment.
All right, so I'm going to bring it back to the coastal permit administrator. There's been a lot of questions that have been raised here today, both by staff, the applicant's agent, the neighbors, and so on. So the applicant's agent is basically requesting some modifications to the language. You know, it's not something that we can just modify on a whim and come back this afternoon, which is not possible. So I think that, you know, a project, an after-the-fact project, especially when I think folks feel that they can build something without a permit and then come back and feel that they can resolve it, you know, is not necessarily the way to go. So I think, regardless, I think the project has to be treated like a new project rather than something that's there already because it does not have a permit. So I have concerns about that. I do have concerns that CDFW was given an opportunity to comment and they have not. And I think what staff needs to do is put a message to CDFW that says, here's the information, failure to comment or to approve this, you know, you've foregone your opportunity. So I can understand, you know, the applicant's frustration on that. But again, I think because there's so much going on here, it's definitely I cannot make a decision on this today because I think things need to be worked out. I think staff and the applicant's agent needs to address some of the issues that have come up. Mr. Morrow has raised 3 issues. The lack of requisite proof of an adequate water supply that will not adversely affect existing uses, i.e. neighbors. He raises the issue of proposed development infringing upon vested property rights. And I think what was mentioned was the realignment of the driveway. And then also noted the Shepherd property has been subject to unpermitted backfilling and grading of the existing drainage courses that currently unlawfully divert water downhill from the Shepherd property to the Guggenheim property. Again, I'd like these 3 issues to be addressed by staff to determine, is there anything that, for example, was there grading that was done that has created a drainage issue, okay, from what the original baseline was? And again, Mr. Guggenheim raised an issue of a steel container and blocking, and again, the drainage and the water availability. So I've got some concerns because I don't have enough information here to address these. And I think I'm going to ask staff, you know, is August 26th enough time to address these issues, or do we need to continue it to a date uncertain to allow a lot of these issues to be adequately addressed? You know, I have a concern about availability of water. Is this, you know, the applicant's agent has said that this is something that could be done prior to use and occupancy. Again, I also have a concern about that, is moving forward with a project that may or may not have water. And so I think this needs to be adequately addressed before we move forward. I mean, we are in a drought, and this does concern me more so than anything else, because I don't want to give the fallacy that a project can move forward if it doesn't have adequate water. So, Juliana, is this the requested continuance to the 26th, do you believe this is going to be adequate time to address all these issues?
Thank you. Juliana Cherry with Mendocino County Planning and Building Services. After hearing your comments, I too am curious if the 2 weeks is sufficient amount of time or not. My preference would be to at least try for the 26th, and if we needed more time, we could continue it again. On the other hand, if we did it to a date uncertain, I actually am appreciative that then we would have to renotice it, and I think that might be a worthwhile endeavor to notice again when we take this project again to a public hearing. I have been to the site at least 3 times, if not more, and I do have an understanding of some of the public comments that have been received. I want to dig a little bit deeper with MCCSD. I've sent some follow-up emails to them. It's just for clarification, if I may, in the town of Mendocino, the right to extract groundwater is granted to Mendocino City Community Services District. And so environmental health does not play a role in determining whether a groundwater extraction permit would be granted or not. In 2017, we did a wholesale update to the general plan for the town of Mendocino and to its implementing ordinance, the zoning code. Groundwater extraction actually was a fervent talk between us and Coastal Commission staff when we looked for their support in the revisions that we were wanting to do to our general plan and our zoning code. We had innumerable conversations about groundwater extraction. So I am concerned that MCCSD has previously said that they would issue the groundwater extraction permit, and now they're saying they'll issue it after a moratorium is lifted. How does that play into our approval? The basis of our approval is that the property does have access to groundwater. So I need to have some more conversations there.
That is a good point that you bring up, because I'm a little uncertain moving forward, basically issuing an approval based on a future or possible condition that may occur. And so for that reason, I'd like to have that explored with the Mendocino City Services District as to how this would play out. I mean, either there's water or there's no water. And so I'd like to have that addressed. So I'm going to go ahead and continue this to August 26th to allow staff and the applicant's agent to address the concerns that were previously raised regarding the condition language. But I'm also, I have these 3 items that Mr. Morrow has raised that I need to have those adequately addressed before acting on the project. And I guess I'm not sure if Ms. Spade is still on Zoom, but I'd like to ask if the 26th is something that would work at this point in time for you to work with staff.
Yeah, absolutely. We can try for the 26th, and I believe that that should give us sufficient time to work through the conditions.
Okay. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and continue the request to the 26th of August to allow all of these issues that have been raised. Because again, I do not feel comfortable with a lot of these issues hanging out there that are unresolved. And you know, again, Mr. Morrow, you raised 3 interesting questions here that I really need closure to. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and continue the item to the 26th of August. Okay. So moving on. Do we have any matters from staff? None. Any matters from the public?
No matters from staff. Thank you for asking.
All right. Do we have anything that came in from public on matters? No?
No.
All right. So with that, I will go ahead and adjourn the meeting at 12:32. Thanks, everybody.